was a bit worried that I read that Kobbie Mainoo is someone that might be available for sale if the right offer came in or further down the line or whatever.
Yeah, obviously my gut reaction would be, don't sell Kobbie Mainoo. You know, he's come through the academy. He's obviously a good kid. He's a very good player. I mean, I guess just with this ownership, don't rule anything out, because we've seen already what they've done in different aspects of the game.
We're the one that has this great reputation for bringing through academy players and making those academy players first team players and winning trophies with those. And yet now you're almost not just encouraged, but there's almost a necessity to sell your academy players. Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. This is Inside United with Laurie Whitwell from The Athletic, of course. Good to have you back on, Laurie. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, guys. Have a nice Christmas.
Lovely. Did you, Jay?
Yeah, it was all right. When's the cut-off point for Happy New Year?
I think this is. We won't be saying that on the next
I felt
Inside
a bit.
United.
Yeah,
I could see, I think this is it, innit? This is the last
Sorry,
day
guys.
of Happy
Great.
New Year, yeah?
Yeah, I'm done now.
All right,
we've taken the tinsel down and everything today.
I actually heard on the radio somebody was talking about them only just taking the tree down, and I was thinking, you are late
No,
here.
mate, no.
12th night, isn't it? Isn't that the 6th?
Right, okay.
Something like that. But we don't need to worry about that. Right, we've got a lot to talk about here with Manchester United. We're in an absolute chaos nightmare, and then we're quite good against Liverpool, and everything sort of feels all right, even though we are in the worst position we've been in at this time in a league season in about 50 years, which is genuinely a worry. We've got loads to talk about. Transfers, we're going to talk about the club in general, obviously the latest on Marcus Rashford as well, because that is a saga that keeps rumbling on, and you wrote a great piece on that recently too. So let's start with the Rashford stuff. And last time you came on, it was kind of this fresh story that had sort of burst into everyone's lives with him and Garnacho being left out. And since then, there's been rumours and reports, and you sort of kind of collated what had gone on and put that out as a piece recently. So let's start with what is the current situation with Marcus Rashford. He was ill, which is the company line of the other day when we United played Liverpool. Wasn't in the squad there. Has only been in one squad, I think, in the last 6 or 7 now. Is he someone that United are trying to get rid of? Do you see any way that this gets sort of reconciled, or do you think Marcus Rashford, we've probably seen his final days at Manchester United?
I mean, he's got 3 years left on his contract after this in the summer, so I think to sort of suggest that we've seen the last of him would be very sort of early reckoning. And I think that, clearly it's not a satisfactory situation for anybody involved at the moment. He would want to be playing football, but United want more from him in terms of application. And he wasn't in the squad for the Liverpool game, although I noticed he went to Kath Phipps's funeral yesterday along with the rest of the squad and a lot of other people. So he's obviously training in bits, but then ill on a couple of days last week. And I think the situation is that if there is a solution perhaps away from United, that they would obviously take that very seriously. My colleague David Ornstein wrote about Borussia Dortmund being interested in him earlier today. There's also, we're told, sort of a bit of interest from Italy, and people that I've spoken to feel like Italy might be that kind of solution. You've seen it before with other players, Chris Smalling and obviously Scott McTominay. The tax laws over there aren't quite as generous as they once were, but I feel like that's a kind of place that Rashford might find appealing to go to, get his career backfiring, and maybe make a name for himself, and then becomes more of an appealing transfer away, or you have more discussions with Manchester United and Ruben Amorim. The issues are in terms of how Ruben Amorim wants him to behave, sort of away from the pitch, and then also at training. And what I'm told is that it's a kind of uniform decision across the club. The club support what Ruben Amorim is trying to do with his players. But clearly, having a player who is one of your top earners, who's one of your best players, when he's actually firing, not available, not in squads at all, is not a happy solution for anybody.
No.
Yeah, it's weird because like Ruben Amorim, when he was first, I think it was when he dropped him for the City game, he mentioned about all these other things, about the way they dress, we look at everything. It does feel more than just what's going on in training, and it feels like you just mentioned there, there's the whole of, as your article mentioned, going out and stuff like that is a factor in all of this.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the key detail that I think I was able to substantiate was that they had this conversation after the Everton game. So he'd obviously started that game, played really well, scored 2 goals, but Amorim after that game was informed, or he'd found out that he'd gone out on the Friday night, and so I think Amorim feels like 40 hours before a game isn't the done thing, and had a conversation with Rashford about it. Rashford told him, from what I understand, that he was misinformed about a late night. So there's a lot of kind of claim and counterclaim around this, and we do have to be careful about absolutely saying what has happened, because I think Rashford will probably feel that he perhaps is unfairly treated in certain quarters, and so to sort of say categorically what has happened, you need kind of absolute certainty on that. But that being said, Amorim will make his decisions based on what he sees in the training pictures. He won't kind of, I don't think, to go along with sort of hearsay. He wants to establish facts as well. And then it comes to the pre-derby game. City, that training session they had on the Saturday. From what we're told, it was a really poor performance from Rashford in training, amid sort of speculation that he'd gone out on the Friday, which is reached the people at the club. And so I think Amorim made his decision based on what he saw, though, in the flesh. And since that point, he came back into the squad for the Newcastle game, didn't he? But it was pretty clear that was down to numbers. Bruno Fernandes and Manuel Ugarte being suspended, for not to bring on Rashford when you're 2-0 down in a game. And I asked him about it after the game, actually, and said, what was that about? Did you not feel like he could have helped you in that situation? And he said, you focus too much on Marcus Rashford, which is, fair. I can understand a manager kind of pushing back against a lot of questions about one player in particular, although it is obviously a very interesting story, and he's one of the biggest players at the club, so you kind of have to ask about it. But he ultimately said, I was only focused on the team and winning the game. So that to me says, okay, well, you think, or at face value, you're saying that the team had a better chance of winning the game without Marcus Rashford. Clearly there's bigger issues at play, really. He's obviously trying to send a message to the rest of the squad, trying to instill a certain standard that he feels should be upheld by all. And so then we come, and then he's been sort of ill for the Liverpool game, and he wasn't in the stand. Luke Shaw and Mason Mount did travel, that they're injured, but they were in the director's box to kind of watch the game and sort of show support for the teammates. So it's a really, I don't know, I think it's a fascinating story. It's a sad story for sure, and I don't know exactly how this one resolves itself.
It's tough stuff, isn't it? So just to get the timeline laid out all next to each other for those initial things. So we played Everton on the Sunday. At this point, there's no suggestion that he'd been out. He didn't know about that pre-game. Is that right?
I believe so.
Yeah. So the game then happens. Rashford gets 2 goals in that game. Plays quite well. Probably the best he's played, maybe all season even. Then after that game is when Amorim finds out, or is told, or believes that Rashford went out Friday night before the game on Sunday. And obviously, it's less than 48 hours, because if you're going out late, you're into the Saturday potentially. So so that's why he, paired with a bad performance in training, then left him out of the City game. Then there was other rumours, again, that maybe are denied, but there's a suggestion going around that he maybe went out again after this conversation had happened with Amorim. Yeah. Is that what's supposedly has happened, or people believe may have happened?
That's the claim, and now I have to sort of say that people close to Rashford strenuously deny that. But clearly it's not just hearsay in terms of what Amorim's acting on. He's acting on what he sees, with his own eyes
in training.
Yeah,
it's such a shame, isn't it?
Yeah, and also you've got, in the middle of all this, you've got Rashford saying to Henry Winter that he wants a new challenge.
Yeah, which
sends a bit of a message to the manager, doesn't it? When he's saying to a journalist, like, look, I'm ready to go to another club.
So they I think Rashford feels that there was a couple of stories, wasn't there, that came out before that point, report in Germany and in the Telegraph as well, about United being open to offers for Rashford. Yeah. So from, I think, his perspective, he feels that, well, maybe United have sort of put that out there in some way. I would feel that that's actually just the individual journalists in question having their own sources and going with stories rather than anything from the club. But that being said, it may have an impact on a player in a certain way, and his response to that is to have a conversation with a journalist where he speaks about wanting a new challenge. He did talk about leaving as well, didn't he? When I leave United, that kind of thing.
Yeah, he did.
Although there was perhaps a little bit of ambiguity around exactly what he said, but clearly the message to me is that he feels like he should be playing, and he deserves a chance to prove that somewhere. If it's not United, then it's somewhere else.
Yeah, we spoke to Henry Winter the next day, and because I wanted to clear that up.
Yeah,
because I was a bit like, is there any ambiguity? Is Marcus saying I want a challenge, but that could be here or whatever? And he was like, look,
He wants to go.
He wants to go. That's what I got from that.
That's how you read it at face value.
Yeah.
It's just I'm trying to be fair to sort of everybody involved when I ask more questions around it, and that's some of the kind of messaging coming back.
I was trying to find the exact quote, but there's a line in there from Rashford as well, something to the effect of, when a situation's not great, I don't want to make it worse. Almost making me think like you said, I don't know whether it's he thinks the club don't want him or whether the fans don't want him, but they felt like a little bit of a, well, if I'm not wanted, then I'm not going to try and, I'm not going to make things worse by sticking around or by insulting things like that. I do get the feeling that Rashford feels like he isn't wanted at Manchester United, or potentially by Manchester United even. And there's in that piece about Rashford, you wrote, Rashford is also known to feel he doesn't behave differently from other Premier League footballers, but faces much more scrutiny over his social life. Obviously, that's how he feels. Do you think that's a fair assessment of the situation? Why do you think he feels like that?
I mean, a lot is written about him, right? I do think that's kind of part of the game when you have risen to such a status that people want to hear about you, and you are clearly an incredibly talented footballer. I think the stats in that piece, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think he's 13th in the all-time record scorers for United, just behind Cristiano Ronaldo. So he's achieved a lot in his career, certainly on the pitch, and won several trophies. Obviously not the top tier trophies that you'd want a United player to be winning, but that's why there's more scrutiny maybe on him than other people. Although that being said, I do think there's there's questions to be asked around the application. If he is going out on these nights, then is that really the best thing to be doing ahead of a game and showing your optimum, showing your maximum? You've seen it in games where he's not looked right for quite a long time, and I accept that is perhaps a byproduct of the team being in a state of flux for a long time. You had an interim manager, and you had Erik ten Hag coming in with a different way of playing. You've got Ruben Amorim now coming in with a different way of playing. And so I do have sympathy in that regard. But I also feel like at 27 now, Marcus Rashford is one of the senior players, should be one of these players that is able to withstand all the sort of turbulence at a football club and stand above it and show yourself as a real quality player.
And there's part of me as well that thinks, right, maybe he is sort of scrutinised more than other people for doing the same thing. Let's say that's true. But then you're not doing it on the pitch. So if we're looking for reasons and things that Marcus Rashford can do to improve his performance, presumably, making your social life a bit more professional, or not going out potentially days before games, or certainly in situations that we know 100% like the night in Belfast and others, like maybe don't do that. And it's not, and then you won't get scrutinised, because if you're playing really well, people don't really care what you do. But if you're not playing well and you're doing these things, I think you're going to get that scrutiny. And also, he's someone that gets paid a lot, and he plays for the biggest club in England. Jack Grealish, by comparison, I think someone who maybe falls into that bracket of isn't necessarily the most professional off the pitch, but doesn't get as much stick. Yes, Man City are the biggest sort of best team in England, or have been, but they're not the biggest team in England by an absolute mile. People don't really care what Man City's winger does when they're not playing for Man City. People do care about Man United, and maybe that's part of the reason why he's up for leaving, because you leave a lot of that behind as well, that extra scrutiny that you get in your whole life. But I just think if you were scoring 25 goals or 20 plus goals a season, occasionally if you went out, people wouldn't really care. But if you're not, and it doesn't look like you're trying to improve it by making better decisions off the pitch, people are going to get on your back, aren't they, really?
Yeah, we all defended and stuck up for Marcus in the past, but is it now we're in the state where 2 of the last 3 seasons have been pretty poor ones in terms of goals and assists and even performances, and you can't just ignore that and say, he's doing okay or he's doing well. Especially as you mentioned earlier, he's so talented, and we've seen what he's capable of. His record against some of the better teams is unreal. His record against the Scousers or against City is very good. So he can do it in big games. Do you think there's any way Marcus Rashford could resolve things with Ruben Amorim and sort of build some bridges, and they can get to a place where he's playing for Manchester United under this manager?
It feels difficult, doesn't it? I think my colleague Danny Taylor wrote a piece on The Athletic where he basically said whenever it gets to this point in a relationship between a player and manager, whatever happens, it's very hard to get reconciliation. And I have to agree with him, just because we've seen it before a little bit with Rashford and other managers at United. So Erik ten Hag, I think he felt like he had a good relationship with him. He got 30 goals out of him in that season, that then he earned this big contract. And I think that was basically playing him in the way. He did play up front a few times for sure, and he scored a few goals that way. But a lot of it was on the left, sort of cutting in, and that's his prime way of threatening defences, isn't it, for Rashford?
Yeah.
And he has been shuffled around a bit. But then even at the end with Erik ten Hag, I think relations sort of soured. There was a bit of friction there. He took him off in his. In that game in Porto, he'd started really well, scored in attacking sense brilliant, but defensively wasn't doing it, so he took him off. Obviously, he had the Belfast incident that you mentioned, and actually Ten Hag, maybe on reflection, was kind of maybe lenient in a way there. He didn't play in the Newport County game on the Sunday, but then he started him in the Wolves game sort of 4 days later. And Erik ten Hag sort of rightly had a reputation for being a disciplinarian. I think he was trying to instill a code of conduct with his players and standards. He dropped him for the Wolves game the previous season for being late. It was only a short time, but late for a meeting, which he'd sort of set in pre-season. I think we discussed that last time, didn't we? So you've got these perhaps. And Ralph Rangnick, I think I touched on in the police. I think he sort of wondered. He trained brilliantly for Rangnick, from what I'm told, but then wasn't doing it in the matches. So he sort of wondered, exactly what was going on. So you've had these issues with sort of different managers, and you just wonder whether ultimately it is the Manchester United, ecosystem, the attention that it gets, the kind of gargantuan nature of it that you need a break from to kind of really. Regain your form and your confidence. When
you put it all together and we go through that sort of potential timeline, or at least the timeline that some people at United think happened, or however you want to phrase that, and then you add in what Rashford said, and then you add in in your piece you mentioned that Jadon Sancho and Aaron Wan-Bissaka both left in the summer, two of his closer friends in the squad, and that he's close with Tyrone Malacia but has tested the patience of other teammates at times. You add it all together, and I mean, if you just take a step back from it being Man United, he obviously just wants to go, doesn't he? It seems like he's sick of it to me. It feels like he's sort of done with Man United and all of it together. You mentioned in the article as well about there was a time when Steve McLaren was overseeing a small tournament at Carrington. Rashford's team made the final. As the game went on, McLaren in his jocular manner said he believed that the contest was Rashford's to win. In response, the player questioned why additional pressure was being put on him. It feels like Rashford's just got this, I don't want to do this. I'm sick of this. Like, I get treated differently to everyone else. I get more criticism for what I do. Steve McLaren's putting pressure on me. All my friends have left. I might go out occasionally a bit more than I should, or a bit more than the manager thinks. He's just done, isn't he? Do you know what I mean? That's how it feels to me. And obviously, I'm not.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment.
Like
I think
it's like he's given up almost.
He would certainly reject, the suggestion that he's given up. But when you stitch it all together, there's quite a lot of things that have happened where you just wonder: is this the right relationship for both player and club? The issue being he's got a big contract and it's got 3 years left to run. So the only way I could see him departing is if United sort of subsidise the arrangement in some way. I mean. That is a done thing in football, particularly if they're wanting to sell a player. There's a kind of compromise being reached. I think they did that with Aaron Wan-Bissaka, Scott McTominay, I think as well. The difference here maybe is if to your point about Henry's interview with him, if he said I want to leave, maybe the club are within their rights to say, well, okay, you've outed your opinions there, so therefore we don't have to come to some kind of agreement with you. But it feels like the transfer fee plus wages would be a real sort of issue for a lot of clubs to produce in terms of the ones that Rashford would actually be interested in joining, you imagine. That being said, there'll be a lot of clubs that look at his situation and think, well, Manchester United is the problem here ultimately, because you've had players that have kind of gone away and done good things outside of it. I mean, Jadon Sancho, okay, maybe it's not exactly tearing the world up all the time, but he seems to have done pretty well at Chelsea. So people might look at that and think, okay, well, if Sancho, who was absolutely exiled at Manchester United, can come to a club and provide an assist, the one that he did for Cole Palmer at Crystal Palace was brilliant. And I know he's not doing that every week, but people will look at that and think we could get something out of this player. It's just when it comes down to the finances, how much are you willing to put on the table for this sort of, I guess, not a risk, is it? But like a kind of take a chance on somebody, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it just seems like the United way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Every season we've got a player that we have to sort of
mad.
eat up some of their wages to loan them out to someone because they don't want to play for us anymore, or we don't want them anymore, and they're on massive money. And
it's a huge issue at United
it's
because
ridiculous.
To get the player that you think is of requisite quality, you have to pay him well. But then if you're wrong about that, then how do you shift them on?
And especially if you want to get someone that maybe has offers elsewhere as well.
Yeah.
Like if you're someone, let's say Man United need a new striker in the summer. Any striker that's going to take us from, let's say we finished 12th to 4th or above is going to be wanted by at least 2 or 3 other top clubs in Europe. Why would they come to us over a Bayern Munich or an Arsenal or a Real Madrid? Well, we'll pay you more. So then, like you said, if then it doesn't work, we've paid them more than anyone would have done anyway because we had to overcome the fact that we're not that good. So then to sell them, no one's going to pay them anything like what we're currently... Like, we find ourselves in this situation because we daren't take risks on younger players because I don't know if it's because they don't trust themselves or they want these big names that they can sell impressions on Twitter about. So then you end up going for big names who, like we said, if it goes wrong, you end up getting 20 million quid for Jadon Sancho, someone we spent 75 on 4 years ago.
They've tried to adjust that, haven't they? I mean, that was certainly the Ineos approach, and we can question that as well. But, you know, like a Lenny Yoro or Manuel Ugarte, I mean, okay, he was at PSG, so maybe he was on decent money there. But I would imagine Yoro wasn't on, you know, huge amounts, certainly not at Lille. So you kind of wonder, okay, to get them to United, okay, you had to get him ahead of Real Madrid, to be fair. So, maybe it was actually decent salary that he's been paid. But I mean, the likes of maybe Anthony, I'm told that he's not actually on, you know, ridiculous money. So if you did want to sort of sell him on, he's a viable option for clubs. It's just that you'd then have to take, you know, the hit on the transfer fee in terms of the way they do the accounting.
The thing with Anthony is, I think Anthony gets more than enough criticism because, you know, he's not been very good, but everyone feels more than sort of capable of expressing that opinion. But I do think if you're in a situation where you've got someone that you've spent like 85 million quid on, but you're only paying them 150 grand a week or whatever it may be, not 300, like you think he's like United's 3rd most expensive ever signing, and he's about our 40th most highly paid player. You think there's a disparity between what we've bought you for and what we think you're worth. That probably tells you that this transfer doesn't really line up. Like an 80 million quid player should be your highest earner, surely. Do you know what I mean? That's a bit of a like, how come he's only on that when he cost that? We didn't know what we were doing. We got it.
We weren't going to get that money anywhere else.
Yeah.
It's a madness, isn't it?
Speaking of transfers then, let's sort of get into that. Obviously, the window's open. It feels like in the last kind of 24 hours or so, maybe 40 hours, there's been a sort of flurry of names popping up, whether it be Rashford, Casemiro, Eriksen, Evans even, and then on the ins there's sort of Nuno Mendes, there's mention of Kolo Muani, there's all sorts of things sort of going on. Let's start with Kolo Muani, because he's someone that your colleague David Ornstein has spoken about, that potentially United are interested in doing a deal there or exploring a loan deal there. What's the latest with him? Is he a player United like, and does that sort of indicate that this sort of left-wing striker area is something we're looking to do in January? Yeah,
I mean, from what I understand it, the attacking part of the team is where they want to focus their energies and finances, really. Okay. Does that mean the summer or does that mean now? They obviously triggered the clause in Harry Maguire's contract, so that kind of, I think, means that centre-backs or the defensive line, you feel like you're sort of pretty well stocked, although I know Victor Lindelof and Johnny Evans have both got their contracts coming up in the summer, but it feels like there's enough sort of security there, and goals has been the real issue, hasn't it? I mean, the last 3 seasons United have scored 57, 58 and 57, I think, goals in the Premier League, which is just so far down, and they're currently on 23 out of 20 games, so it's just so far down.
I'm dreaming of 57 goals this season.
That's the ratio, right? Yeah. So I mean, Kolo Muani is a player that they know very well. They were looking at him when they signed Rasmus Højlund. It basically came down to those two. He was leaving Frankfurt, but it was a big transfer fee that they were demanding. I think it was like 100 million, something like that. I know he went to PSG in the end for like 90. So in the end, I don't think it was a huge disparity between him and Højlund, but it felt like Højlund's value kept going up from like the original sort of 40 million kind of estimate, and Kolo Muani's eventually sort of stayed and kind of came down a little bit. But they were the two, once they'd, the Benjamin Sesko thing hadn't worked, and they kind of were looking at the market, who was available. So Højlund was available, Kolo Muani was available.
Frankfurt, a hell of a deal, that, by the way. 75 going up to 90, like you said.
Yeah.
What? What a deal.
He was quite exciting though, wasn't it, at the time, wasn't he? And listen, if you've got no, you're right, Joe. Yeah,
they've absolutely smashed it with that, haven't they? Yeah. I know he's all right, but 90 million euros.
Come on, no, that's
I would love to be a fly on the wall in some of these negotiations, because you look at the numbers and then you're just like, how did they come to that? But obviously, in the actual moment, it must be the pressure to actually do a deal. You'll have so many people applying that pressure. Agents will come out the woodwork, and there'll be different reasons for different deals getting done. I find it fascinating, to know what's happened and then what hasn't happened in some regards. So I mean, Kolo Muani is obviously someone that they know, and David Ornstein, I bow down to his connections and knowledge of the whole game. You mentioned Tottenham in that report as well, didn't he? So you sort of wonder, are there a few clubs vying for it? I mean, United, I'm just told the finances are so tight in terms of PSR, FFP, even just the actual money, because they've been losing, 5 years straight. Sir Jim Ratcliffe has clearly come in with an agenda to change that and tighten the belt, so to speak, albeit there's always a little bit of wriggle room, it feels like, when it comes to football, in terms of dismissing Erik ten Hag, in terms of hiring Ruben Amorim. So I'm never going to write anything off. But I feel like it would need to be a deal that would really suit United from a financial point of view. That being said, clearly if Rashford isn't available for whatever reason, even if he goes, they do need an additional player in that attacking part of the pitch, I feel like. I guess he would be one that they've studied closely and that they could do quickly if they really wanted to and were able to.
Do you rate him, Muani?
I think he's decent. I think the fact that he can play sort of across the front, I know we don't have a front three anymore in that sense, but he can play maybe as an outside 10 and as a number 9. I think it's something, but like you said, just from a sheer numbers perspective, all it took the other day was Bruno and Ugarte to be suspended, and we had Casemiro and Eriksen playing as our midfield 2. Like at the minute, our attack is basically fully fit, and even then it's pretty threadbare. So like if someone gets an injury, other than Mason Mount, I think everyone's available. Like if someone gets an injury, Højlund tends to get at least 1 or 2 injuries this season. If he gets one, we're screwed. Like I think we just numbers wise, like you mentioned, Laurie, we need someone.
And Zirkzee, Amorim said, sort of wasn't a number 9 really. Before the Newcastle game. I mean, then he sent him on at number 9 at Anfield. So clearly, he's very honest, isn't he, Amorim? And I thought that was perhaps interesting in his slight change of tone on the transfers. So after the game, after the Newcastle game, I asked him about sort of can you supplement this in January, and he basically just said, our situation, we haven't got any money. I wasn't brought in with an idea that I would be able to spend a load of money basically, but then before the Liverpool game, his answer was slightly different, where he basically said, I'll keep it to myself, but we'll try something, and it kind of, I don't know, there's the tone, the way he said it kind of made me think, okay, so they obviously are having conversations about different players.
Do you think he was just like good and fuming after Newcastle? Like, what's the point? Going down and anyway, shit, we've got no money, everyone's crap, I'm probably going to get sacked at the end of the day.
A bit like
what are you asking me that for? Throwing his water at you, like maybe he was just like fuming after the game.
Yeah, fair. Yeah. Well, I mean, listen.
If you asked him now, I'd be like, right, we're going to get messy, but the 2012 one, we're going to have to be putting a decent performance against Liverpool.
And I do feel for managers sometimes. I mean, I gave Ange Postecoglou a little bit of stick on Radio 5 Live the other day, because I was saying I think his reaction about the whole refereeing situation was just way over the top, after the Newcastle game himself on Match of the Day, I think it was. But you must, as a manager, you just get all these questions from people like me, like, what do you know? Like, shut up. Stop pressing this button. Go away. And then obviously on Friday before the Liverpool game, isn't maybe a better mood on that front.
Actually, they look quite good in training.
Well, there we go. He's had 6 days at this point, hadn't he? Then, or 5, however many days of actual training they had. But that was interesting that they produced that performance after that kind of gap, where he did have more time on the training pitches. Although both him and Bruno said it was because we tried harder and we can't do this. We need to do this against Southampton now. We can't let it slip. So I don't know where the truth exactly lies, but it feels like hope that Liverpool game performance gave a little bit more hope at least, and a bit more confidence that stick with it and it might be okay.
What's the sort of setup now then with transfers? I know we might not be doing any, but we've had Dan Ashworth gone. Is it Wilcox and Amorim and Barada? How's it who's sort of leading the way with it all?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think Wilcox has stepped into that, kind of recruitment role from Dan Ashworth. Had it kind of, I guess, fleetingly for one window. Omar Barada, though, has shown himself to be someone that's very football focused, with the appointment of Ruben Amorim, and I think certainly on, the score in terms of players, I think he will get involved on that. And then you've got people like Matt Hargreaves, who's the director of negotiations, so he'll be the one that they sort of send in to have these talks. So he's the one, Joe, that we're kind of thinking, okay, what can he do in these pressurised situations?
Yes. He didn't sign Anthony, did he?
No, I'm trying to think back. Who was... Well, so that was John Murtaugh and Richard Arnold doing the actual deal to Ajax, because it was chatting with Edwin van der Sar, wasn't it? Who was chief executive of Ajax at the time, and he challenged them to go as high as they could.
And they showed him.
Yeah. Well,
what you think we're too stupid to do that?
You can keep going, mate. Hey.
Okay, so it's a different setup then. And I mean, obviously, I know we've already discussed the Ashworth thing, but you mentioned it there. Like if Amorim doesn't work out, is Barada going to get sacked? Like, is it like you get one chance and then you're done? Or do we think there was more fundamental reasons why Ashworth left rather than just he wasn't that keen on Amorim by comparison to Omar Barada?
Yeah, I think there was more to it than just that. Clearly there was a clash of personalities there with Jim Ratcliffe, and maybe ultimately they felt that there was too many people in that level of hierarchy where, okay, well, we can have Barada and Wilcox kind of cover this stuff really. But yeah, I do feel that Amorim, certainly when he was appointed, I had people sort of saying, okay, this is very much a Barada appointment. It was a collective decision. So you've also got Sir Dave Brailsford there as well. It's sort of in the mix. Although he's not like technically a United employee, he's someone that is very much in tune with United. And I think that, but I do feel that Amorim's success is quite aligned with Barada. Now, whether that means that he then ultimately carries the can if it doesn't work out, I don't know. But I feel like there's a synergy there between the two of them.
It does feel like almost, as we watch it unfold, and we don't know the day-to-day, or I certainly don't, you'll know more about it than me, but it almost feels like that CEO role, when you think of what a CEO does, it almost feels like that kind of Ratcliffe and Brailsford are kind of doing that, and that Barada's doing more football-y stuff. Because in my head, a CEO, he's like handling like finances and football stuff as well, but it's kind of like the running of the club. It sounds like that Brailsford and Ratcliffe are doing some of that as well. Could that have maybe pushed Barada into the footballing side a bit more than was planned, or I don't know? Is that how did it happen that Ashworth wasn't needed? Is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, well, I mean, it came down a little bit, didn't it, to Ratcliffe sort of asking him what his suggestion would be to replace Ten Hag, and Ashworth sort of presenting a list rather than a kind of clear candidate to go for. And I think Ratcliffe felt that as a sporting director, you should be giving me a clear idea. I'm not the one making this call. It should be you guys. So that was an issue. I don't think really Ratcliffe is very much involved with United. Like he is calling the shots or different aspects. I don't think he's involved in a day-to-day basis where it's like the mundanities of being a chief exec that he gets involved with. It's more the overarching ideas, similar with Brailsford, where he'll be across pretty much everything, I think, but whether he actually then gets into the nuts and bolts of certain decisions, I don't know. I think that would still be Barada's domain. And then you've got other people around the club, like Roger Bell, who's the chief financial officer, who is an INEOS long-term employee, and he retired and he came back to do the CFO job
just when he thought he'd got out. They pulled me back. Unbelievable. So like little things like obviously like the transfer, not the transfers, the match tickets going up, people's bonuses being cut. That's obviously that's all been thrown at INEOS in terms of blame, and I guess it's a directive from them to cut costs.
Yeah, it's directive from Ratcliffe.
That's not Jim Ratcliffe's idea then to go £64? No, £66, presumably, or we don't know.
I think it might be.
Okay. So he is doing some of the mundane bits then.
Well, yeah, but I suppose it's the then application of that I'm saying he doesn't necessarily. He will come in with, this is what should be happening.
Okay.
Do it, right. and let's see. There'll be conversations around that where maybe there's some dialogue to be had, but I think he's got pretty fundamental ideas about how he wants United to look, and clearly streamlining the business with a kind of cold-hearted take on it is what he wants to do, and obviously that's caused a lot of turbulence and a lot of heartache for people.
I think that was one of the points that was in your article on Dan Ashworth about him not making some of the cuts or perhaps being reluctant to make some of the cuts that were needed with the football department when Sir Jim Ratcliffe's like, look, you've got to be brutal, and he wasn't as keen
that's some of the points to raise,
which you can understand.
Ashworth was too nice.
It's too nice. I don't want to sack everyone while you can go then instead.
It feels like that partly. That's one reading of it.
Just going back to transfers, obviously we know about, you mentioned attackers there and the fact that we do need goals, but we keep hearing about left wing back, a wing back or a full back, but it will be a wing back, won't it? Do you think there's any movement there? Do you think there's any chance that Manchester United could look in January to do anything there, or again is it going to be sort of more likely down the line?
Yeah,
I mean, Nuno Mendes has been mentioned. Yeah, I've got that right. That's the right Mendes, isn't it? There's too many Mendeses. Obviously, George Mendes is a key sort of figure with a couple of United players, with Ugarte, with Yoro. I mean, so he's one that I think clearly Amorim's worked with before. From what I understand, I think that would be not a January thing. In terms of the money that would be required. Again, it's all about trying to balance it. It's all about sales to get players in. The left wing back role just does look so in need of, assistance. I mean, Dalot actually played really well, didn't he?
I thought he did well at Anfield.
Best game of the season by a mile.
Yeah. I mean, he tore Trent Alexander-Arnold apart. It was quite striking to see, really. So maybe there's still some life. If he kind of just has that as his one position to keep going with, he'll be okay with it in the long run. But clearly, the injury to Luke Shaw, Tyrone Malacia just hasn't looked right since he comes back from injury, and you sort of wonder, is he at that level required? And so, clearly that's the area of the pitch that you think needs, just a stellar kind of signing. But sorry that I'm not coming to you with
No, it makes sense as well, because I think you're not going to get someone in January and then get someone else in the summer, are you? Do you know what I mean? And who would you get in January if you haven't got much money? So it's
Sergio Reguilon.
Could it be a short-term loan thing? Do you think that's the most likely of options? Because like we said, if a couple leave, we kind of need someone just to be on the pitch, let alone be taking us to the next level. We just need bodies. Anybody that goes out, Amorim will want replacing. If it's not like a like-for-like midfielder for midfielder, so say Casemiro does move to Saudi Arabia or Anthony goes on loan somewhere, then he'll want a replacement for that. I don't think everyone agrees with that anyway. Joshua Zirkzee is another name that's been mentioned in terms of leaving. I think yourself and David Ornstein again in the Athletic reported that he sort of intends to stay. And Amorim, I think, he's either publicly or it sort of seems to be suggested that he wants him to stay as well. Is that the case? Are United already kind of thinking this isn't working out, this isn't the guy for us, or do you think it's just he's had a couple of bad games and he'll get back in the team and prove people wrong? I think that clearly there's been some
conversation around how correct that decision was to sign him for that amount of money, and clearly he's not quite, doesn't feel like he's the right kind of profile yet for United, and particularly in this situation where you've now changed systems. But from what we are told, that the intention is that he stays, albeit there are several clubs that are looking at him. I mean, they could do a quick deal and sort of say, okay, we accept it's not working out, and see how much they could get for him, because I mean the transfer fee wasn't enormous really for a player of that
40 million-ish.
Because they had the buyout clause, and I think that's basically what convinced them to go for him, because they knew they could get him, they knew what the money would be, they paid a little bit more than the buyout clause to be able to spread the payments over 3 years, I think it is. So you could maybe say, okay, that's fine, you've tried, it's not worked. But I wonder if there's an idea that actually who would they then get in to replace him? Could you actually replace him for the same money again? So maybe they actually look at it in the summer and try and take a fresh view then.
Just a couple of other bits I want to ask you about, away from transfers a little bit. Do we know why Garnacho was dropped?
So I'm told that it was more about perhaps willingness to do the things that Amorim wanted them to do. It was described to me as no way like Rashford's situation, where I think Amorim, it'd be interesting to ask him if he dropped sort of both of them from the squad to kind of make it a more, palatable. It was sort of like neither one was kind of singled out. But I do feel from speaking to many people that it felt maybe a bit harsh on Garnacho. That being said, clearly there's some, sort of wrinkles to his game that need to be ironed out. And if there's been any kind of, pushback over instructions, then you can understand why a manager kind of has gone, right, I'm making my point here. But then again, he came straight back into the squad for the Spurs game, came off the bench. He's not started, has he, since that point? No, yeah. So that's the only thing that I wonder, how does that all kind of come down in the equation? Because ultimately you've got, as we've mentioned time and again, as I have, PSR sort of calculations to make and academy players. I know he came in, from another club, but it was like 200 grand or something like that. So that he would basically count as an academy player in terms of if they were to look at opportunities to sell.
Yeah. Sorry, just to go back to transfers. I think it was Ornstein has mentioned like almost any player could be for sale, and I think you've mentioned it before. But there's one or two that United wouldn't sell. But I was a bit worried that I read that Kobbie Mainoo is someone that might be available for sale if the right offer came in or further down the line, or whatever. What's your understanding of it in terms of players that United are just like, we're never going to sell this, or not, certainly not anytime soon? Are there players that you think United wouldn't sell, or do you think it's a case of, I know obviously new signings, like not going to sell Manuel Guy when we just bought him, but I mean like certainly some of the academy players or some of the players that are younger players, do you think there are some that are just United like, no, we're not selling that?
I think the difficulty is with someone like Kobbie Mainoo is that an academy player. So if you're looking at it with a business brain, you look at what Chelsea have done. Then Conor Gallagher was sold to Atletico Madrid. Mason Mount was sold to Man United. So if they were looking at that Chelsea approach and feeling like, okay, this is actually looking like it could work for Chelsea. I know they've had a slide more recently. Obviously my gut reaction would be, don't sell Kobbie Mainoo. Yeah. He's come through the academy. He's obviously a good kid. He's a very good player. Okay, maybe he needs what Amorim wants from a midfielder. There needs to be a bit of, improvement in certain areas from him. But I thought he was brilliant at Anfield. So clearly shown that he can operate in this system in a very difficult game. Again against a midfield that was, bossing a lot of games prior to that point. But I think the point is just that. I guess just with this ownership, don't rule anything out, because we've seen already what they've done in different aspects of the game. The thing that I would say perhaps though is that, to then replace someone like him, you're talking a lot of money for a transfer fee. You're talking, back to your point, Joe, the wages then that would be expected for that transfer fee. I don't know, the FFP benefit doesn't seem like it would match up to me, but yeah.
It's such a shame, innit? Especially with just looking at Chelsea's transfers here, and like you mentioned, so many of them are academy players or people who've sort of come through at Chelsea. Conor Gallagher, Lewis Hall. Mason Mount, obviously, Loftus-Cheek. I mean, the list sort of goes on. Callum Hudson-Odoi. Some of these. Mark
Gahey, did they sell him under this regime, or was that before them?
I'm not sure. It wasn't too long ago anyway. They want him back now, apparently, don't they? So, occasionally
you could see that, couldn't you?
Yeah, well, that was 21-22. They sold him for 23 million euros. Tomori again, Tammy Abraham. All three of those went in the same window. All academy players. It seems a particular shame for Man United because of all of these teams, no offence to Chelsea or City or even Arsenal, we're the one that has this great reputation for bringing through academy players and making those academy players first team players and winning trophies with those. I think that's one of the main kind of cultural through lines that all great United sides have had, where Chelsea can't say the same. Arsenal were famous for the opposite when Wenger was there, which is their prerogative, but no one else does it like Man United does in that regard, in England anyway. And yet now you're almost not just encouraged, but there's almost a necessity to sell your academy players, maybe before they've had the chance to prove themselves, or in Kobbie Mainoo's case, after they've had the chance to prove themselves. I know we haven't sold him, but the idea that he's not off the cards when 20 to 30 years ago, he would be like, he's going to be the star of this team for the next 10 years if he can possibly do it. And now United are going to have to go, we can't really operate like that anymore because he's pure profit. And instead of looking at academy players as the next Ryan Giggs or the next Paul Scholes, it's your pure profit. It's just a dollar sign on the head. That's a real shame for me, particularly for Man United.
Yeah, and you look at the run that they've had since like 1937 where they've had a academy player in the squad. Yeah. I'm not sure what the current total is, but I did a piece like in 2019, it was 4,000 games in a row. Yeah. And I think the derby...
Was that the one where it was like... Was it only Kobbie Mainoo?
I think Kobbie was the only one. So obviously because Rashford and Garnacho have been dropped, so Garnacho counts for this run. it was only Kobbie that kept that thread sort of lasting. So yeah, it would be. I mean, okay, you shouldn't just have players in your squad just to keep that run going, but maybe you should. I don't know. It's Man United, so like you kind of the academy, to send a message to people, and have that held up as something to be proud of, I think is certainly worthy. I don't know. I think it's a warped way. I accept what some clubs are saying about academy players being sold and the PSR calculation. I do feel like it's a bit of a cop-out, though, because just be better with your recruitment. You shouldn't have to... If you don't want the player, fine, and you think you can get good money for him, no problem. But if that player... if there's potential there to actually last and sustain at a club, don't just sell him because you can make, extra money this time. That just feels like you lose something, as you say, particularly at United, where there's a long history of players coming through that have been at the club for years and years, that they can then go and represent the shirt for many years to come. Yeah,
it feels as well that you're going to... I know Chelsea have been doing it for a decade or more, maybe probably pushing 20 years now, but there's going to be this sort of race to the bottom for teenage talent as well.
Yeah. Well, it's happening right now.
Yeah, well,
like you said, Chelsea are ruthless with it, aren't they?
If you can get someone in at 15, 16, 17 and declare them an academy player, anything you get from them is pure profit. Like, why would everyone not just sweep up all of the best? Again, it already happens, but there's going to be a particular emphasis on it when you see transfers between the likes of Newcastle, Chelsea and Villa kind of purposefully selling these academy players seemingly just to avoid PSR regulations. That feels like those regulations aren't quite fit for purpose if you can just sell your academy kids to each other for inflated fees just to get around them. That they're not working in kind of combination with what football is. You're having to do these extra sums that are human beings to get out of it. It just doesn't make sense to me, and I hope either United can find a way out of it or the rules can be tweaked slightly so that doesn't seem to have to happen, because that whole deal with Lewis Hall being one of them just felt bizarre to me in the summer, and I hope we don't have to do that. Just finally then, looking at the sort of squad in general and the feeling around Manchester United after the Liverpool game. I know presumably you haven't spoken to Jim Ratcliffe about this in person, but do you get a sense that a performance like that goes a long way when it comes to people buying into what Ruben Amorim's selling? Like, not just the players, but also the fans and the media. I felt like everyone has spoken about Man United differently in the last 2 days. It was almost like, will he last till May? And now it's like, these players have to buy him because when it works, when he gets a week, when he gets this, he can challenge the best team in Europe. Do you think that kind of performance is just such a big thing for him and kind of his reputation?
I think so. I think, because you're right, I think the pressure was sort of, as mad as it sounds, I'm not saying that there was any kind of conversation around it, but he was asked the question, wasn't he, after Wolves about his successor at Sporting. He'd been sacked. Dan Ashworth obviously lasted 5 months, so it's a brutal industry. So it felt like those kind of conversations might start creeping into the discourse, and you had certainly, I think people were sort of writing about perhaps Ruben Amorim's intransigence to change systems, and him saying, this is my idea, this is what I'm selling. I've not got any. It's kind of like being a bit disingenuous, a bit tongue-in-cheek, isn't it? This is the only idea I've got to sell. Clearly, there's tweaks and alterations within that, but I do feel certainly that performance, particularly that performance, they could have won it at the end. Obviously, that would have been absolutely wild scenes.
Imagine.
But I do feel that just takes. It allows him to breathe, allows the situation to just have a bit of space, and from players, all the way up to the top. I do feel that it just gives a bit more belief, and like I say, like you say, that doing that at a place like Anfield is one thing, but also having that group of players on the pitch together, understanding each other, you feel that can be replicated. It's just about them actually putting in the graft. It feels like.
No, I agree, and there's a good opportunity, I think, as well, the game at Arsenal, because you've got that again a few days, haven't we?
Well, what do you reckon? Because obviously when they went to Spurs, they beat City, and then they went to Spurs, and he changed it so much against the Spurs side that was weakened in itself, and ultimately go out, and then the 3 defeats in a row in the Premier League happen. You sort of wonder, if he had that back, would he change it that much? Like, do you think it's actually important now to go and do the same against Arsenal, not even look beyond that, just to keep that momentum going?
I do, yeah. I feel like if you go to Arsenal and lose, or lose badly or whatever, it's kind of like the Liverpool game didn't mean anything. I know you might change the team and you might lose because you've changed it and rotated it, but it's like, okay, and then the stats will come out again where it's like 8 defeats out of 9 or whatever it'll be. And you're like, let's keep going. And to beat Arsenal at the Emirates would be huge. Also as well, just from having that positivity, you're still in the FA Cup. We're the FA Cup holders. We're still in it. We could retain that. I know we've still got the Europa in terms of silverware, but it's a bit deflating if it's literally like you're fighting for mid-table or to get in the top half of the table and maybe the Europa and that's it. It'd be great if we could still keep in the FA Cup and get a scout like Arsenal. So yeah, I'd like to see us keep going. I know the league has to be the priority and I understand all that, especially with the money and whatever, but yeah, I'm hoping he's looked at that Spurs game and looked at it as slightly a missed opportunity and maybe he'll go for it, because I think Arsenal are playing. Is it tonight Arsenal play, or when is it? Arsenal have got the Carabao, aren't they?
Yeah, midweek. Anyway.
Yeah, so Arsenal
and they've got some injuries at the moment.
Arsenal have got Saka, who's huge for them. He's out. They're playing, I think, is it Newcastle in the Carabao, so they've got a tough game. They've not won a trophy for a few years, have they, under Arteta, so they're probably keen to rectify that. So I think this is a good opportunity for United to get what would be a big result. Winning at the Emirates is a big result, whichever way you look at it and whichever team you face.
We don't win them very often these days.
The last few visits there have just been so frustrating because there's been glimpses of them playing well and then they're just kind of crumbled almost. Each of the last 3 years, right? They've ultimately lost, and it's felt like they could have got something from the game.
And weirdly enough, and obviously Ten Hag lost his job in the end anyway, but after that really poor start under Ten Hag, it was the win against Liverpool and then not too long, it wasn't the next game, but not too long after the win against Arsenal at Old Trafford that made people go, oh, actually, he's got something about him here. And we didn't beat Liverpool, but that was at Old Trafford that Ten Hag beat them. If we can put in a good performance and take points from Liverpool, then beat Arsenal, because we're either going to win or lose. There's no draw option, is there, with it being the FA Cup? So if he could do that, I think a lot of people would really go, actually, these big away games as well, where Ten Hag never won, if you can put a couple of them on your CV already, City and Arsenal away from home in your first season, the Wolves and the Bournemouths will sort of dissolve a little bit in people's minds. If you can show us you can beat the top teams away from home, we can find the Bournemouths, we can beat them eventually, keep beating these top teams, and that's how you win big trophies. So I think that'll be absolutely massive for him. And like you said, can't be rotating or resting for this one, because like if he gets battered or it's another not noticeable drop off in performance, we'll all be back going, like I said, 1 win in the last 9, that's not very good. So yeah, I think you just got to go for it.
I don't think we've got the squad as well. No. Like some teams, you can take 1 or 2 players out and you still, okay, or you still the drop off isn't much. I think with United, if you lose 1 or 2 key players, there's a noticeable difference. So yeah, we'll see anyway.
Right. What do you think, actually, before we go?
Yeah, I agree with you guys.
Do you?
Yeah, I actually do, weirdly.
That's more like it, yeah. Bizarrely.
Disagreements are better for TV and YouTube, I know, but, I'm going to... It's a lovely
now and again,
yeah,
you can agree with us.
Right, thank you very much for joining us on Inside United. Thank you once again, Laurie, for coming on. We'll be back with another episode very soon as well. Get your thoughts in the comments on Rashford, on United's transfers in the winter as well, and on Ruben Amorim's current kind of stature and reputation as Manchester United manager. Yeah, don't forget as well, there's a link in the description for The Athletic. Go and check out Laurie's great work there. And all the stuff we've mentioned, the Rashford article, the 1 year of Ineos, and they do every single transfer window as well. You do a little transfer, what's it called now? Deal sheet. You transfer deal sheet, which goes to a lot of the top teams, where they're looking. It's really good. I was reading it before, so make sure you check that out. All the links are in the description. We'll see you in a bit.